anti-racist, and let me click on this recording before I continue. So yeah, welcome to Fighting for a Black Worker Bill of Rights, an anti-racist job quality strategy, where we're going to discuss the Black Worker Policy Coalition that has recently formed. We're going to talk about how the coalition came to be and our experiences thus far, the strategies that we have been developing together to push forward our campaign, and we're going to talk about any ideas and thoughts that you may have. So our hope is from this session that we will leave with some takeaways in true participatory design fashion, and that you will leave with some pretty great takeaways as well. So with that being said, my name is Nzinga Hooker. I'm the policy director at the National Black Worker Center, and I'm going to give a moment where each of my co-facilitators can introduce themselves. And I'll start with you, Alex, and then you just pass it to the next person.
Yep. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Alex Camardell. I'm the Director of Workforce Policy at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, and I am based in Atlanta. I'll pass it to MA.
Greetings, I'm Aimee Josiane, they, them pronouns, based in the Atlanta area. I'm the president of the National LGBTQ Worker Center, also a trainer for labor and community organizing groups through the Midwest Academy. And I will pass it, and a board member of the National Black Worker Center. That's right. And I'll pass it to Aisha.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aisha Davis. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the policy director at the Black to the Future Action Fund. And I am based in Chicago, Illinois, and I will pass it to Jamal.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamal Craig. I am with I'm the president of the Pittsburgh chapter of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and I am based here in Pittsburgh. My pronouns are he, him. And thank you all for joining us, and looking forward to some lively discussion.
All right, thanks, Jamal. So all the facilitators are members of the Black Worker Policy Coalition that is leading the campaign to win a Black Worker Bill of Rights. So you're going to hear more about the Bill of Rights, the coalition, during this workshop. So again, I just want to welcome you to the workshop. It's Fighting for a Black Worker Bill of Rights, an anti-racist job quality strategy. And we're just happy that you're all in this space. And like I said earlier, feel free to drop in the chat your name, your pronouns. You can shout out the city or the state that you're in, and any organization or institution that you're affiliated with that you want to share. So I'm just going to kick us off, and we have about an hour together. And you're in a group with some talkative folks, so we're going to keep the time. But I just want to say that this is just going to be a start to the conversation, and we're going to have opportunities that we share with you at the end about ways that you can continue to work with us and potentially partner with us. So throughout this workshop, we're going to drop some things in the chat that you can engage with. We're going to share our petition, an invitation to join our Facebook community, partnership sign-on forms, and so forth. So look out for that stuff that's going to be dropped and shared with you in the chat. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of why and how all of this came together. So back in October 2021, the National Black Worker Center decided to create this coalition after some feedback from local Black worker centers and other partners, where Black-led and centered national and state-based organizations with aligned visions and values would come together for a number of reasons. The primary reasons being to jointly address issues critical to Black workers and to co-create our first joint initiative, which is what we're going to talk mostly about today, which is the Black Worker Bill of Rights. And we were doing this through a participatory design process, policy design process, and campaign design strategy, or should I say participatory campaign strategy design, because we understood the need for such a space and to combine our resources, whether that be our capacity, our membership, our expertise, our ideas, our creativity, our energy. And we went through a really intentional process of decisions around coalition membership, which we'll talk more about partnership building, about committee development and what the roles and responsibilities of committees are. And we're currently doing a deeper dive into a more formal structure and decision-making process for the coalition. So currently there are 21 members of the coalition. The 4 co-facilitators that just introduced themselves are members of the coalition. There are also 52 partner organizations in addition to the 21 coalition members. And as we are going to talk more today about the strategies we're working on, and we're going to have that discussion with you, we did launch our campaign this past May. So we launched it on May 2nd in observance of May Day. It was a beautiful virtual rally. We had about 600 people register. We had in-person celebrations in 4 major cities: Atlanta, a couple folks on here are in Atlanta, Baltimore, Peoria, and Washington, DC. And following that launch, we were digging deeper into the strategies that we want to employ to move this campaign forward that really focus on workers, worker organizing, worker power building, and legislative efforts. So it has been an amazing experience so far to see how this coalition of workers, worker advocates, policy folks, our wonks, our organizers, our think tanks, our grassroots community folks coming together to deepen connections and relationships and to create not only a detailed policy platform that we will be releasing this summer, but really to strategize about how do we increase, or I should say, increase economic equity for Black workers in this country, and to change the job quality narrative and exactly what that means and what Black workers need. So with that context about how we came to be and how this coalition is working together, I'm going to pass it to Aisha and Alex, who are going to share their experiences in a few remarks.
Alex, you go ahead and start.
Yeah, so once again, I'm Alex. I'm at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. And for those who don't know about the Joint Center, we're a think tank, and not just any think tank, we're considered America's Black think tank. We've been around for over 50 years, working on issues that would advance to the full freedom of Black America. And I lead our workforce policy program, which is concerned with all things labor and removing barriers to post-secondary education. We sit in the community of other DC-based think tanks. We're kind of in the Beltway conversation, and the conversation happening as it relates to job quality right now and advancing like a more progressive vision for workers and workers of color is not being led by workers themselves. So given our focus on Black communities, that was obviously something that stood out to us in the more popular conversation happening on the Hill within the Biden administration and otherwise, and in philanthropy and in other places. And, so we were hungry and really seeking out an opportunity to join forces with a coalition of folks that were, centering and prioritizing workers themselves, who we could use and who we could mutually resource through our research and through other means, communications capacity and other ways to help elevate the voices of Black workers in these job quality debates, which were becoming, in their essence, kind of race neutral up to this point. So I was, thrilled to be invited to join forces with the Black Worker Policy Coalition to develop this Black Worker Bill of Rights, because the proposals, the solutions, the research that had already been produced to this point was just lacking. So it was, for lack of a better phrase, it was lacking flavor in so many ways. It was lacking the very explicit experiences of Black communities and Black workers who are, their experience is what's driving kind of the poor working conditions and low wage labor market that we see today. So that explains why the Joint Center joined forces and why we're part of the coalition. We think there is a great deal of potential in terms of leveraging the coalition to help change the narrative. I've said this often and will continue to say that we are overdue for a Black Worker Bill of Rights, one that, wouldn't just benefit Black workers, but ultimately we end up benefiting everyone. So that is why we're at the table. We're researchers at the Joint Center, so ensuring that our research is connected to action is also a huge objective. If I have to think about what our motive is for being at the table, that's a big one. And we want to be able to leverage our capacity as data analysts, as policy analysts, and otherwise to support the overarching aims of the coalition and the Black Worker Bill of Rights. So I'll stop there because I know we're keeping on time. Aisha.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I wanted you to go first is because I have a cat who's very chatty, so she might be voicing her thoughts as well today. But But again, my name is Aisha Davis. I'm the policy director at the Blacks of the Future Action Fund. And at the Action Fund, we are an organization that is working to make sure that Black communities are powerful in politics. What that means is that we are talking to folks on the ground, making sure that we're doing some really heavy research, including some polling, to really see what it is that our folks want done and how they want it done, to be honest. And then another part of the work that we're doing is really trying to make sure that we are sharing out information along this political education line of thought. So we are an organization that really wants to make sure that what we're hearing from our folks is directly from our folks. So that we're not kind of in this bubble where we're sharing out what we think personally, because what Aisha thinks doesn't matter when it comes to policy. What matters is what our communities think. So one of the other things that we're able to do as a C4 is actually help with endorsement processes and actually like push for politicians to live up to whatever it is that they said during their campaigns to get Black folks to vote for them. And I know that we all know about organizations that do endorsements like that. One of the things that makes us a little different is that we don't call just anyone a champion. We don't endorse people just because they're Black. They have to actually be for those policies that support the work and lives of all Black folks across this country. So with that being said, it felt like a natural alliance for us to work on this Black Worker Bill of Rights. I think there's a lot of conversation that happens around Black workers, but not with Black workers. And so this was an opportunity for us to make sure that we're engaging at every level that we can to make sure that Black folks all across this country are able to not only be engaged politically, but also have their rights upheld and respected by those politicians who they're electing and by those agencies that these politicians run. In terms of the things that were especially exciting about this process and that I really appreciated is that this has been a coalition process from the start. So I know that none of us is unfamiliar with the idea of what a coalition is, but I think that also we have a lot of experiences with coalitions that can kind of get away from their base, right? They can get away from the foundation that they're supposed to be built upon. And what we aren't doing is that abstract, we're going to talk about people without them being in the room situation. I feel very happy and very proud that this coalition has always included Black worker centers from across the country, which means that there is no way for us to not be accountable throughout the entire process. I think that that piece of accountability that we talk about for our elected officials is also extremely applicable to the work that we do as folks who are speaking on behalf of and alongside of Black folks. So this entire process has been really eye-opening and exciting, and it's giving us an opportunity to make sure that we're not dropping the ball or just getting information from folks and letting it go and drift out into the ether. We're making sure that it gets put on paper and that it gets pushed. So I will stop here so we can keep with time, but yeah, it's a very exciting process and one of the coalitions that I'm very proud to be a part of.
Appreciate you, Aisha, and you have great timing. You're right at the mark. And one of the things I wanted to add is, in addition to what Aisha just shared and Alex, there are a number of local Black worker centers that are part of the coalition, but there's actual members of the local Black worker centers and worker centers that are part of the coalition. So it's not just staff or leadership. Members have been participating in this work. And MA may speak more to that, as one of their members is an active participant in the coalition. And we also have our organizing team at the National Black Worker Center that has been, who has created this task force of Black workers from across the country. And those folks before even these folks in this space came together in the coalition, were working on the Bill of Rights. And a lot of what they were creating is where we started from as far as drafting and creating this Bill of Rights. So it has been truly worker-led and worker-centered. So with that being said, we're going to shift a little bit from just talking about our experiences to a reframe that MA and Jamal are going to lead us through.
Jamal, I'll invite you to go first.
Sure. So again, welcome everyone. When we talk about this idea of Black worker centers, Black worker Bill of Rights, the question that comes to mind for me personally is always, are we doing something new, especially when we use the word reframe? And I think if we take a serious look at history, we will see that we're not really doing anything new because a lot of this, the things that we're doing, the things that we're discussing have already been laid out or taken on at some point in history. And so I like to use the term, it's cyclical. The problem that we have is we're facing just a different time period. If you look at the 30s, at the heyday of the American labor movement, this country was primarily industrial, at least in the Northeast and the Midwest. And so you had workers, particularly Black workers, moving in from, the depths of the South and the agricultural economy that they faced, along with all the racism, moving into the Midwest, the Northeast, to work in these industrialized cities. That's one of the things that's changed. The industrial manufacturing plants of the Midwest and the Northeast are no longer here. So if you just look at in my city, for example, the city of Pittsburgh, no longer do we have an enormous amount of steel workers. We still got, even though it's declining, a strong population here, but jobs. And so the city likes to rebrand, is rebranding, has recreated itself. And the thing that they, I shouldn't say they, but what we pride ourselves here in Pittsburgh is saying that we are a tech hub. We're moving into, the 21st, 22nd century, building robotics, automation, computer technology. And what that means is we now face a new economy and new types of jobs. But when we look at the racial impact of that, Black workers are often left out. And when we look to the organizations that have historically been partners in this work, we're left out in those spaces as well. So when we use a term such as reframing, we Black workers have to reframe this and reinsert ourselves back into spaces that we've been pushed out. When we have looked at allies, we've been left out. When we look at organizations, as I said, we've been left out. So what does that look like for us moving forward with a new economy, new types of jobs that we've been displaced from and left out? And with that, we have to have the conversation of what this looks like and where we're trying to go. And what we know is we're always struggling and working hard to achieve power, to build power. And what we know historically is that we've never had power outright or absolute. So what that leads us to is we have to do lots of coalition building. And what will those coalitions look like? Who will be a part of those coalitions? I think we, from the work that we're doing here, we really set a good tone and come to a realization that, coalition work works. When we have people on board who are thoroughly invested, on the same agenda, they have the space to be open, to be real. And so that helps us to grow, to be strong, and to get to the real issues of what we need to be addressing and how we do that. I think that's one of the unique things and the opportunities. There's young people here. There's older people here. There's LGBT here. We all embrace each other because we have one goal. There may be many goals, but we're ultimately working as a group towards one goal. And when we look at history, those elements of coalition work and coalition building are there, but we can just definitely look and see, as with any product that's made, the glue starts to wear. And so that's where we are now. When we talk about glue, we see that it's worn in some places and it needs to be replaced. And that's what working with this coalition has inspired me to do, is to seek out those new opportunities, to put the right pieces in place to get Black workers and other workers across the country back on a united front. Because one thing I wanted to close my opening with is corporations are still making record profits. The average worker, particularly Black worker, it's going in the opposite direction. Wages are either stagnated or they're dropping. Opportunities for jobs, employment, stagnated or decreasing. And so that's the beauty of working with this group, is that we are all on the same page, looking to build power and come up with solutions for our problems. And thus now we have a Black Worker Bill of Rights that we're pushing. We're going to push hard to get this passed at every level of government. And so I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you. You said almost everything that that I would have said. And what I think that Jamal just framed really well is the weathering of the glue, right? As he put it, in our view, has led to the current paradigm in labor where we've moved away from the idea of grassroots leadership. And if we think back to the movements that have managed to amass large groups of Black and Brown and immigrant workers, students, women across multiple sectors, there was an emphasis on people power, and the idea that at the end of the day, the power that we have is not in individual political relationships, it's not in the size of our budgets, but it's really in the number of people that we can bring together to move towards a particular vision. And so what we're hoping to do with the way that we're building this coalition is to practice this paradigm shift from this sort of grass tops political and labor leadership paradigm back to this paradigm of building grassroots power. And what that does mean, to echo a bit of what Jamal said, is that we have to think about who has been left out. In the recent years, right, if we think about the past 2-3 decades of our movement, who has been left out? Who has been left out of those mainstream movements? We know that there has been farm worker organizing and domestic worker organizing for decades. That is, starting to more and more become part of the mainstream labor organizing movement, even though it had been pushed out in the past, but also thinking about how do we, think about Black workers as also being inclusive of sex workers? How do we think about our labor movement as being inclusive of sex workers, of workers that are in the gray and informal sectors? People who are selling ice pops, during the summer, very, very informal work, but still valuable parts of local economies. How are we thinking also as a labor movement about people with disabilities? And really grappling with that tension around the idea that the labor movement is focused on people who work. And we also recognize that there are some people who are unable to work. How does the labor movement actually, talk about that? And how do we reconcile with the idea that some of the work that Black people are doing right now across the country is inevitably going to disable them? Some of what happens because of structural racism means that people are going to become disabled, right? We're all pretty much temporarily able-bodied. So we want to really think about those ideas as we're building our coalition and bring people in who can center the needs of those populations. But that really is going to work. That only really works if we're, really being intentional about who we're bringing into this coalition and thinking not just about traditional groups within labor, but thinking about all kinds of groups that represent Black people and that bring Black people together to build power. And so, part of what we would like for you all to give us feedback on are some ideas that, as we're bringing people together, we wanna begin to create visions for how we get to a world in which, or to a country in which Black people, Black workers, regardless of what sector they're working on, have access to these 10 rights specifically. How do we ensure that that happens? And so we are going to be, grappling with a couple of themes. The first theme is thinking about the use of policy. Do we, as a movement, based on this current political context, do we have enough power to actually pass federal or state legislation? Is there a strategic reason why we would focus on either one of those as we're bringing together a coalition of Black workers across the country? So federal and state legislation is one thing that we're thinking about as one vehicle to create change, but not the only one. We're also thinking about the role of administrative and budget policies, recognizing that a lot of the things that we are asking for are administrative changes. We're asking for agencies in this country to actually do their job in a proactive manner, rather than waiting for things to go wrong in workers' lives before there's some sort of agency intervention. How can they be proactive? And how do we set up budgets that reflect this vision of Black workers' liberation? So administrative policy and budgets is another kind of bucket that we would like some feedback on and some ideas and some learnings from you all. And then we also want to talk about industries. You know, I mentioned key industries that have been left out of the mainstream labor movement, or definitely left out of unionization. We also recognize that that Black folks, because of the history of labor segregation, might be concentrated in certain industries. Do we have the potential to make interventions based on industries where Black folks are concentrated? And is that a way that really helps us, you know, build the kind of power that we want to build across the country to see this change? And then the fourth piece is really coalition building. We're talking about a vision, a kind of vision for a coalition that we don't see a lot of, particularly on a national level. We're talking about a coalition that is not just made up of presidents of organizations and directors and, you know, researchers and, you know, policy analysts, but we're talking about a coalition that actually has, you know, the person who works at McDonald's, you know, the school teacher, right? The person who works a temp job with an agency. We want to think about coalition building as something that really empowers people who have in the past been left out of those kind of decision-making spaces, and turning our coalition into that kind of a space. So in a minute, we're gonna have you all break out into 4 groups, and thank you for putting the groups in the chat. But I want you all to consider a specific prompt, and I'm gonna put this prompt in the chat. So y'all will be in groups, and based on what your group is focusing on, and we'll have one of the facilitators be in each one of your groups. But based on, you know, as it relates to building strong grassroots coalition, for instance, and specifically as it relates to winning a Black Worker Bill of Rights, what are those unique opportunities or challenges to using any of these methods, to thinking about federal policy versus state policy? Are there opportunities that we see in federal policymaking that we don't see in state policymaking, or vice versa? What else are we missing when we think about the idea of making change via policy? And we want to ask similar questions about the other, you know, for the other groups, when we talk about admin and budget fights, or when we're talking about targeting key industries, when we're talking about building these, you know, massive grassroots coalitions. What would we need to use this effectively? What might be missing? And what are some unique opportunities or challenges that a group like ours should be thinking about as we begin to really build on this robust vision? And so we have a Jamboard as well. Have y'all used Jamboards? Folks use Jamboards? Y'all know how to do. I think Mark is saying, no, y'all gonna help each other out. The Jamboard is a tool. It's almost like putting Post-its on an online document. And so when y'all break up into groups, you'll be able to use Jamboards to just, jot down notes and ideas that come up. So I'm putting a link to the Jamboard in the chat. And before we push folks into groups, any questions, any reactions, anything not make sense? Is the math mathing, as they say? Y'all with me? Y'all in here?
Amy, I have a question, but I'm driving. I can't put my hand up.
Okay.
As you talk about industries where it is easier, and there are some that are not as easy to organize people around the idea of a Black Voters Bill of Rights, can you be a little bit more definitive? What industries are you talking about? What does your research tell you?
So this is where we're really trying to get some of those ideas from you, Sandra, and from everybody else in here. We're all part of different organizations that might be focusing on particular industries. For instance, the National Black Worker Center, is focusing on poultry plant workers in the South, as and thinking through specific industry interventions for those workers. But the question is more so, are there certain industries based on research, based on what you're seeing in your own communities, that we should be thinking about focusing on in order to really advance this Black Worker Bill of Rights?
I understand. Thank you for clarifying that, and the difference regionally between organizing in the South. And we have great opportunity here, but it's letting people know that it is something, it's not a bad thing. When you go to South Carolina, you will even have some people in the community to tell you, no, that's really not legal here, which is not true.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll wait to the breakout session before I start my comments. Thank
All
you.
right.
And
Well, look,
y'all,
Sandra,
Sandra is a member of the coalition, so I'm just shouting her out. Sandra has been an active member, so I just want to throw that shout out.
Sandra, we're gonna put you in that industries breakout.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let's see. We're gonna go into breakouts for for 20 minutes. You'll be in the breakout room with one of the facilitators, and then we'll come back together. And please use the Jamboard to jot down ideas, and then we'll come back together. Thanks, y'all.
I can stay in the main room to let folks in from the waiting room if folks join. Yeah, and then I can put folks into breakout rooms.
Okay, great. Great. Naja, oh my gosh, Naja. Okay, let me go into that group. I'm just gonna start going into group based on who I want to talk to. See, a number of people I know. I'm like, okay. So funny. Are you here in person?
No,
Okay.
I'm I'm still in the DC area.
Okay. Just wondering. I was gonna try to link up with Jamie.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so they text me, but we didn't talk. So I'm gonna reach out to them after this.
Nice.
But okay, I'm gonna go and bounce around.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey. All right, welcome back. Y'all, we have about 4 minutes, never enough, never enough times. I want to open it up to folks to share highlights from what they talked about in their small groups. And then, you know, any of the facilitators, please feel free to jump in as well.
I will jump in real quick because I do have to run in a few minutes. But I will say that we had a chance to talk a little bit about both long and short-term strategies that could work at the state and the federal level. But one thing that we definitely noted is that even when something like this is passed, there is a very significant need for public education. So that education includes around what resources are available, what rights are being covered, who gets to do what and how. And then one piece of this, and we know that the focus is now on the corporations, but if there is a way to educate corporations around how a Black worker bill of rights would benefit them, it would make them more inclined to share the information with their workers. So I think that that was something that I definitely wanted to highlight. Another piece that we did discuss is the ways that the political landscape looks different in different states. So for example, in a state like Illinois, where there are some pretty strong policies already, it might look one way, but then in a state like California, where it's a little bit more tentative to talk about race-specific things due to the outlook on affirmative action, how can we be strategic in making sure that what we're talking about actually gets across the way it's supposed to? But I'll stop here because I know we only have a few minutes left.
I'll jump in for our group, and Ray took notes for us in the Jamboard, which I know we'll share. But this topic of targeted industry has to be layered with geography, given some of the different policy contexts that vary by state. So if we're thinking about targeting specific interventions, policy tactics, advocacy efforts to particular industries, we also have to consider the geographic context that they're in, which is also layer on top of that the policy context. You know, an example that's brought up is, you know, favorability in certain states around like poultry, Georgia being the poultry capital of the world, you know, allegedly. What kind of incentives are given to that particular industry in a state like Georgia that prohibit or limit the potential of collective action in the workplace is something worth exploring. And we have some specific research takeaways that we may want to take action on as the coalition grows and moves forward around that particular question.
Thank you, Alex. Nzenga's group or Jamal's group?
Yeah, Emily, do you want to report back for us?
Yes, so happy to. I'm trying to like transfer my notes to like stickies like everybody else. I did it I did it differently. But yeah, I think there were some good conversations around other examples or models or places for overlap and collaboration. Specifically, the Fight for 15 came up a number of times, the idea of community benefit agreements and looking into that. Connecting deeply with communities on the ground and community issues and kind of forging kind of connections between folks on the ground. Then just the excitement around kind of how broad the Bill of Rights is and how many folks could get under that umbrella and really building power through coalition in that way. And then some talk about focusing on specific groups, focusing on gig worker rights, et cetera, was exciting. And then this idea of kind of connecting the various bills of rights that are now percolating. For example, could the restaurant worker Bill of Rights actually link to and speak to the Black worker Bill of Rights and vice versa? Just a way to kind of lift each other up and build power in that way. I'm sure I missed things, so others can jump in.
Thank you, Emily. Last but certainly not least, the group with Jamal speaking on administration.
Sure. Is there someone from the group who would like to report out, or I'd certainly extend that invitation?
I'm intentionally being silent because I did all the talking.
Okay, so, we had great conversation. Brother Mark was very gracious to provide a lot of insight. We talked about administrative policy and the opportunities that exist there. And so with that, we talked about the fact that the Biden administration is probably one of the most pro-worker, pro-union administrations that we've seen, I'd say ever. Some might disagree, but we just have to look at what the facts say. And that is that what Brother Mark laid out was that, the new general counsel at the National Labor Relations Board or agency, board, is looking for partners, something that we talk a lot about here in the Black Worker Center, partners to be able to utilize the agency, which is an administrative agency, which has the power to implement administrative policy, administrative law. One of the downsides of that is if we're not, or workers, constituents aren't utilizing the agency, we talked about how budget cuts take place. And some of the things that get cut in those are those departments that do the type of community outreach that we need to be doing to get workers more educated, more informed in terms of how these agencies work and how they benefit people. We know that they work. We know that they have positive impacts on a lot of people's lives, but if we're not utilizing them correctly or getting our partners and everyday workers engaged in these processes, then they fall by the wayside. A couple of things that we talked about in terms of how to do that, how to get more people, utilizing members of Congress to initiate congressional inquiries with stories and issues and problems so that these agencies have to act. Again, as I said before, laying out relationships with, as he said, the general counsel is basically busting down the door, trying to get people to engage and build these relationships and partnerships. And so with that, the last thing we talked about was just what we do a lot of, sharing our stories so that people don't feel like they're on an island and suffering in silence, so that they can understand and know that there are coalitions like the labor movement. There are coalitions and partners like the National Black Worker Center, and one soon to be coming to a neighborhood near you so that you have support to bring about justice, fairness, and human dignity and decency. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all those sharing and all those learnings. And we're about 3 minutes over time, but I do want to pass it back to Nzinga to close us out.
Yeah, Alex, I didn't know if you want to say any closing points, but as I shared in the chat, we have the Facebook community that you can join. As I said earlier, this is just a start to this conversation around strategizing with you guys. We'll continue to add to that Jam board. It'll be available for you to access for as long as you need, and it'll be on our Facebook group, so join that. And we'll share updates about the campaign and work that we're doing there. I dropped a few things in the chat. I dropped the petition. I dropped a partner sign-on form. And like I said earlier, by this summer, you will have the full policy platform. We'll be releasing that. So you should get more information about that soon. All right, folks, I'm getting noticed that we're a lot over and the next session is starting, but I really appreciate all the participation.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank y'all.
Peace, y'all. I think I'm the host, so.
Yeah, okay, so I guess we leave, it'll wrap up.